Okay, good morning, everybody. My name is Ryan Aliff. I'm a superintendent in operations with the Calgary Police Service. I'm just going to read a brief prepared statement, and then I'll take some questions. We recognize the significant concerns that many members of the public have raised in relation to a video circulating online that shows a Canine Unit member striking his police service dog. We are continuing to review the incident. However, we want to assure you that this is not an acceptable or standard method of training that our Canine Unit uses. The officer and PSD were on scene of a dynamic and high-risk arrest in a firearms investigation, which involved resources from across the service, including members of patrol, the TAC team, and the Canine Unit. While on scene, the PSD began barking, which could have alerted offenders to the location of the officers on scene. In response to this high-stress officer safety situation, the handler struck the PSD once. The PSD was not injured in this incident. The correction method used by the officer in the video is not condoned by the service. We have spoken with the officer involved, who has taken immediate responsibility and expressed regret for his actions. The officer has worked in the Canine Unit for 6 years and has demonstrated professionalism and integrity in his work prior to this incident. We've received several formal complaints in relation to this incident, and we will review thoroughly to ensure that these actions are not repeated. I'll take questions now.
So we will start with Canadian Press. If anyone's on and would like to ask a question. Okay, moving on to CBC Calgary.
Sorry for the delay. Rick Donkers here. Superintendent Aliff, what is the correct procedure for silencing a dog in such a situation?
Thanks for the question. The handler has a few options, obviously situationally dependent. So in this case, the handler and the PSD were at an inside containment point at a high-risk call. Silence is part of concealment, which was one of the things the officers had to have to guarantee officer safety at that point. The dog started barking. The initial thing an officer would do, or a handler would do in that situation, is verbally correct the dog. Obviously, verbally correcting the dog in that situation would have just added to the noise of the situation. The next option the handler should have gone to would be correcting the dog's behavior with the leash. The handler didn't do this. He kicked the dog, which is unacceptable.
Thank you. I have no follow-up.
CBC, any follow-up? Thank you. Okay, moving on to City News.
Hi there. Does a police dog or a professional dog require different treatment, or is there anything different about the training that would require this kind of discipline? When you take your family pet out for training, I assume it's slightly different than the way you train a police dog or a professional dog. So is there anything about that training that would be different, that would maybe lead to a different kind of way you would need to handle the dog?
Yeah, good question. Thanks for it. First off, obviously police service dogs are not pets. So these dogs are more of a partner to our officers, and they perform very high-risk police response functions. So the training that you'd have for an average family pet is much different than you'd have for a police service dog. In this instance, when an officer is juggling multiple priorities, so we've given him a position on the outside point of a house that requires him to remain focused so that he can relay information about what's happening from his area. He has a canine member with him that, from his point of concealment, has to remain quiet, or we may alert the people inside the residence to the police presence on the outside. You can't afford to have an officer give up their position with noise in that situation. So the quickest way to correct the dog through our training would have been, like I said before, with the leash. in this case, or the only other option, I guess, would be for the officer to remove themselves from that position. But removing himself from that position, one of the decisions he had to make was we would no longer have that house contained. And so that presents different officer safety risks. It doesn't change the fact that how the officer went through the process to achieve that end was not the way we wanted to achieve it. He was trying to silence that dog in the moment.
And then my follow-up would just be, what happens to the dog now? Is this a case where the dog needs, or you would want the dog to be retrained? Does it stay with the handler? What happens now?
The dog will stay with the handler. This is a high-functioning police service dog. We have no concerns with the dog's ability to function in these situations. This is a very common thing that a handler corrects through the course of their duties. We're reviewing this, and just to give it some context, I mean, this only happened late last night. It happened at the beginning of the call, and the handler was standing outside for about 4.5 hours intermittently before he was even able to be addressed by supervisors to start to review the incident. So the police service dogs stay 24 hours a day with the handlers. So this dog went home with the handler. We have no concerns for the dog's safety. The dogs are continually assessed. The handlers are very close with their police service dogs. They have to be because they depend on them for their safety.
Okay, moving on to CTV Calgary.
Hi, Superintendent. This is Kevin Nimick from CTV Calgary. Would you describe this incident that we saw on video as animal abuse?
No, I would not.
Okay. Can you give us a bit of background into this dog, this Canine Unit member? How long has it been a part of the Canine Unit? Have there been any problems with its behavior in the past, that sort of thing?
No, this dog has been a member of the unit for just over 5 years. It's a high-functioning police service dog. We don't have any concerns about its training or behavior.
Thank you.
Moving on to Global Calgary.
Hi, the optics of the video are pretty damning. We've had a lot of complaints about that. So wondering, what actions are you specifically taking to kind of change those optics and decrease that public outcry?
That's a good question. Everybody that watches the video here on police service in the Canine Unit, none of us liked the look of that video. None of us wanted this to happen. And we acknowledge that this is not acceptable ways to correct dog behavior. We don't train to that behavior, that way of correcting. We don't condone it. I think the only thing we can do right now is acknowledge what happened and work with the handler and continue the review process. We have multi-layered ways of reviewing these incidents to make sure that we're balancing the situation properly against what has happened. I totally understand, all of us here understand, that from somebody just seeing the video, it doesn't look good at all. And none of us like the look of it. But there's a number of things that add context to what happened there that mitigate some of the intent, because there was no intent to hurt this animal. The intent was, in this case, to silence the police service dog because the noise that he was creating was presenting an immediate officer safety concern.
Is there any, oh, sorry.
I was just going to say, then I thought about your question. We'll just continue to put it through the process. We haven't had even 24 hours to properly review this, so it'll go through a number of different reviews before it's completed.
Is there any kind of review in policy or the training that these officers have that may take place?
Well, yeah. So one of the things that will happen is there'll be a debrief. Obviously, this is something now that we've discussed with the officer. The officers immediately acknowledge that this is not what they would do again, and they regret doing what they did. That behavior will be reviewed, and it will be put into the same process of how we internally review these things and investigate them. I'm confident
no follow-ups.
This behavior will not be repeated.
Okay, moving on to post media.
If there's a question
Okay, if
asked,
there's no questions from post media, I didn't hear one, so we'll move on. Post media, if you are having connection issues, maybe just put a message in the chat. Moving on, I think we have someone from SATE. If you would like to ask a question. Okay, moving on to QR.
Hi, Superintendent. Thanks for taking the call. First, I'd like to know if the officer and dog are still on active duty. If there was another call that required a canine unit, would they be out on the street today?
Right now they're off shift. And in speaking to this, we want to give the supervisors in the unit the ability to connect to this officer and this canine. At this point, we're not concerned that this officer and this dog cannot do their duties. We want to make sure that the way they perform their duties are consistent with their training. And those kind of conversations have to take place first. This officer has been this behavior from this officer is not indicative of the 6 years that they spent in the canine unit. So from that standpoint, this is a one-off incident.
Follow up, you said that there have been some formal complaints received. What's the next step here? Is there discipline that is considered at some point, and when would that happen?
So at the conclusion of the review process, probably a couple of recommendations would go forward to a deciding body to best resolve the situation. This will be something that the main focus of this is to prevent this not only from happening again with this officer and this police service dog, which I'm convinced it will not, but making sure it doesn't happen again with any of our police service dogs and their handlers. Just to circle back to the beginning, none of us here like this, and none of us here wanted this, including the handler. It was a mistake, and I know all of us regret it. So we'll do everything we can to prevent it, and we want to train through it.
Thank you.
Okay, someone from Western Standard. I think you're on the call.
Yeah, I think I may be able to get through this time without back noise. Superintendent, can you give us more details, please, on the incident itself? Was it a domestic call? What type of firearm was involved? Those sort of details?
Without potentially compromising an ongoing investigation, I can't. But what I can tell you is this: we knew that there were firearms involved in the call. The resources that were applied to the call itself definitely underscored the risk involved. The tactical unit, the canine unit, patrol resources. We had an incident command framework set up so that we could resolve the call using negotiators. So in this type of call, when an officer has what we call an inside containment point, it is a very important piece of the resolution. These points are the first ability for our officers on the ground to let our incident command elements know what is happening as it unfolds. So you can understand that to get into a position like that, this officer has to be very close to a crisis point, which is why that concealment and cover from fire because of the firearms would have been important. And some of that includes complete silence.
And a follow-up question, what's the name of the dog?
At this point, we're not going to release the name of the dog. And one of the best parts about our canine unit, which I love, is the fact that our dogs, as much as they are part of our service, they're a big part of our community. By releasing the dog's name, we're releasing the name by proxy of the officer themselves. And at this point, we wouldn't be doing that because this officer isn't named in any sort of an offense. So I'm sorry, but I'm not going to release the name.
Thank you.
Okay, 660 News.
Good morning, it's Safe Kaiser. Superintendent Aliff, I spoke with some experts in the canine training realm. Now they explain, well, kicking a dog certainly isn't standard operating procedure. Generally, it is up to the handler who knows their dog best to correct that dog in the way that they do respond best. So, hypothetically speaking here, if that dog, let's say, doesn't respond to a leash correction and there is some sort of safety or danger there, do you feel like it is reasonable or acceptable for an officer to kick the dog?
You know, I can only tell you what I talk to our experts here, and I have full confidence in our Canine Unit chain of command. I have full confidence in the members that train our officers here. The canine community in Alberta and across Canada, I know they're incredibly close, and they're incredibly professional, and they take what they do very seriously. So the only way I can answer your question is this: these officers and our officers here at the Calgary Police Service don't train to correct dogs like that. We don't train to interrupt behavior like that using a kick or a strike. We train verbal, and we train physical control with the leash. The other options we have would be to remove the dog from the crisis point, which in the heat of the moment last night, with all the other things this officer is balancing, extreme cold, inside containment point, protecting the other officers around them from exposure to potential risk from the crisis point, they made a decision that they regret, and it's a decision we don't support, and that's to correct the dog using a kick.
Now, earlier, I believe you mentioned it, but just to get reclarification, was this officer's first attempt at correction the kick, or were there other attempts before that we didn't see on camera?
My understanding is the first attempt was the kick.
Thank you so much.
Which is exactly what you see on the camera.
Okay, we're going to go back to the Canadian press.
Sorry, Amy, you were really cutting out there. Would you mind repeating that?
Yeah, going back to the Canadian press. Bill, if you're having trouble connecting, you can just put your question in the chat and we can read them out. In the meantime, have we missed anyone? Okay, I think we will leave it at that for the day. If you have any follow-up, you can contact the media line. Thank you.
Amy, I just want to say one thing before we cut out here. I just want to say this. If I wasn't clear with it before, this is not why we wanted to be here today. And we are very sorry this happened. We understand the impact it has on the community. And some of the people that just see the video alone, we do understand the impact it's going to have on them because of the relationships they have with animals in their lives. We're taking this very seriously, and we will follow up, as we said. So thank you, everybody. I appreciate your time here today.